This is lesson 4 of the historical geography of the Holy Land, and we've entitled this The Holy Land in the Second Millennium BC. This is the Canaanite period. This is proto-historic, which means that we are going to have to take most of the information from archaeology, since there are no written records that can be used at this time. The earliest Palestinian town that has been discovered has been Jericho. We'll talk first of all about the Chalcolithic period, which is usually from 4000 to 3000 BC. And we're just going to make comments about where various towns are located in this region. Along the Jordan, in the Jezreel Valley, the coastal plains, Shephelah, and then by stream beds in the northern Negev, and the hill regions of Galilee and Mount Ephraim. These are usually widely dispersed and unfortified. There's a settlement in a number of Canaanite tells: Megiddo, Beit Shan, Gezer, and Lachish. In the early Bronze period, which is from 3150 to 2200 BC, most of the large Canaanite towns were founded at this time. Megiddo, Kirjath Jearim, and Ai have been excavated. In EB2, construction of huge walls of brick on a stone foundation. At Megiddo and Kirjath Jearim, they reached a thickness of 30 feet. In EB3, a new culture appears, known as the Khirbet Kerik ware. This is a type of pottery, and it was named after the place where it was first discovered. And perhaps there was a new wave of conquerors that came in from the north, and maybe it originated in northern Anatolia and the Caucasus. Widely dispersed in the north, but not so much in the south. Winnie's campaign under Pepi I, which is 2325 to 2275, this is Dynasty 6 of Egypt. It says that they went past Do's Nose. And they assume that Do's Nose is Carmel, Mount Carmel, that the part that juts out into the Mediterranean. And it says they went past Do's Nose, landed, campaigned inland, despoiled crops, burned dwellings, and forts. Gardner, on page 96, says, "Then came the report of an insurrection at Nose of the Gazelle, a region that has been conjectured to be Mount Carmel." It also mentions that they defeated those who were upon the sand. This is usually used of the people who lived in Canaan at that time. Then there is an Amorite wave. It's a material culture change completely. It was a new occupational wave that put an end to the EB population. It laid the foundation for the rise of new settlements in Middle Bronze and the Late Bronze. This was one of the greatest and most decisive migration movements in the history of Palestine. It was not a phenomenon unique to Palestine, however, but it is observable in all lands of the Fertile Crescent. These were sometimes called the men of Amaru, the Westerners, the Amorites. Palestine and Syria called the land of Amaru, the Westland. The Mediterranean Sea was known as the Sea of the Amaru. The population came in as nomads. They spoke a West Semitic language. The archaeological research has shown that the occupants of the country in that period belonged to several groups, which took over one after another the various regions of the land. On hundreds of tells surveyed in southern Gilead and the regions of Ammon, Moab, and Edom, one finds pottery from this period, after which time follows an occupational gap of nearly 600 years. Similar situation prevailed in the Negev. High cultural level was evident, a great technical ability of these people. Similar phenomenon is observable in the hill country. In all of these areas, one finds a settlement of very brief duration, which disappeared at the end of EB 1. No other permanent occupation took place in those areas until the Israelite period. The complete suspension of occupation in Transjordan and the Negev was apparently brought to pass by historic catastrophe. If we compare Genesis 14, it may be the expedition goal was the 5 cities of the plain. This is the story of the kings that came from the north to attack the kings that were living near the Dead Sea. And we have the Valley of Siddim, that's the Dead Sea area, Ashtaroth, the capital of ancient Bashan, near Karnaim, the Shaveh Kiriathaim of Reuben, El Paran near the desert, Ein Mishpat, and Kadesh Barnea, and Hazazon Tamar on the southern border of Canaan. We have the story of Senuhe, which is apropos here. Senuhe was an Egyptian official, that he was probably a tutor for some of the children of the Pharaoh. And we read in this story that the Pharaoh died and is being replaced by his son. And for some reason, Senuhe didn't feel safe in Egypt, so he decides to leave Egypt. And it tells of his trip that went up the coast where the forts are located. As we see that the Israelites did not go up that way because of the Egyptian forts. Well, he went that way, and he was very careful to travel mainly at night. And he didn't want anyone to see him. Well, he went into Canaan and up to the line of forts at Byblos, and then he seems to have turned back and went to Kedem, where he is taken in by a prince of upper retinue. And he is given the Yarmuk Valley as his place to live. He also marries one of the chief's daughters and becomes a prominent citizen in that country. He is also in charge of the defense of the border. And there was a challenge that he had from another chieftain, and a war was fought between the two, the single combat. And the opponent dislodged his arrows and spear, or whatever it was he used, and missed. Senuhe waited until he got closer, and he was able to kill his opponent. And then it mentions that he stripped his camp. That is, he took over everything that he owned and all of the cattle and the family that he possessed. near his death, or at least when he got much older, he wanted to go back to Egypt and be buried there. And this was what was achieved. He contacted the ruling authorities in Egypt, and they gave him permission to come back. This is the first Egyptian document concerning Palestine. And it's interesting that Sinuhe, when he describes the country, also describes the same fruit that is used in the book of Deuteronomy, where you speak about the products of Israel: grapes and figs, honey, olives, barley, and emmer. I think that he omitted pomegranates at that point. But it is very similar to the list that we have in the book of Deuteronomy. Now we come to the execration texts. I mentioned that I would be talking a little bit more about these. An execration text is designed to be a curse. There are two of these. The first collection comes in the late 20th century, and they are names inscribed on sherds, and along with the appropriate curses. Now, what the Pharaoh is doing is putting the name of an enemy on a sherd, and if the enemy rebels or does anything he should not do, then the Pharaoh breaks the sherd, and sympathetic, it breaks the individual whose name is on the sherd. So there are 20 towns or regions that are mentioned on this first group, and 30 different names. Some think it's a tribal situation represented with several rulers for each region. Some of these that are mentioned are Jerusalem, Ashkelon, Beit Shan, and Rehob in Palestine, Byblos, Akkad, and Ulazah on the Phoenician coast. Now this picture is typical of a nomadic society caught up in the process of settlement within the tribe. That is still a basic form of social organization. You still have the tribe, but they are nomadic, planning on settling down, but they haven't made it yet. There's also mentioned in the text that who may rebel, who may plot, who may fight, who may talk of fighting, or who may talk of rebelling in this entire land. That was the definition of those who were going to have their name smashed. And then at the end of the 19th and early 18th century, the inscriptions are made on small figurines in the form of prisoners. The roster is composed on the basis of lists from the first expedition and contains only those towns conquered or subjugated during this campaign. There was Byblos, Ulazah, Arakat, and Tyre. In the Lebanese Bekaa and Damascus region, Shaph, and perhaps Rehob. On the coastal plain and the Shephelah, we have Aphek, Ashkelon, Eglon, Hormah, and perhaps Lod. In the Jordan Valley is Ayan, Abel, Laish, Hatzor, Pahel, and perhaps Zarethan, which is Beth Haran. In Bashan is Ashtaroth, Basra, Zer, Kamath, and perhaps Ma'akah. Galilee, possibly Kadesh, and Beit Shemesh. In the Ephraimite and Judean hill country, we have Shechem and Jerusalem. And the cities of Cush and Shutu also appear, Beni Hassan has an inscription on the wall of one of the tombs, and this is a group of 37 Asiatics who came from the land of Shutu and delivered black eye paint. Probably that Shutu would be Gilead. Now, the difference between these two collections of execration texts reflect the changes that took place in Palestine during the 20th to the 19th centuries. There's a transition from a nomadic to a sedentary way of life, and a shift from patriarchal rule by 3 or 4 tribal leaders to an urban aristocracy, usually under only one ruler. Now we come to the Hyksos period, the 18th through the 15th centuries BC. There are no relevant Egyptian sources for this period. About 1720, Egypt was conquered by the Hyksos. They ruled Egypt and Palestine simultaneously from their capital in Tanis, or Zoan. Some of them have Amorite names. This is the introduction of the horse-drawn chariot, and also the class of people that are known as the Marianu. There was a new fortification system at this time. You had a large brick wall, sloping ramp made of the bricks and the beaten earth, and these are perhaps designed to prevent the use of the battering ram against the walls. In the Middle Bronze too, large towns with strong fortifications appear, and I have a list of those. I won't go through all of them, but these are prominent cities that occur in that area. Hatzor played a unique role under the Hyksos. The largest Palestinian city ever built in the biblical period is Hatzor. The question then arises, were these cities, as Hatzor, Tel El Yehudiya in Egypt, and Katra in the middle Syria, and Carchemish on the Euphrates, were these originally settled towns, or were they great military camps? They occupy acres and acres of land, and there's enough room here for a number of chariots to maneuver. We now have the rise of the new Egyptian empire. The late Bronze Age was a direct continuation of the Hyksos period. Hatzor lost its position of leadership to Gaza. There were petty kingdoms in Canaan. Fidelity on the part of the Canaanite kings was assured by the dispatch of their sons as hostages to Egypt. Egypt often did this, and we'll be seeing a list of prisoners that were taken to Egypt. The Egyptian bases was Gaza, which is in what we call the Philistine area, Joppa, which is on the coast, Megiddo, which is one of the passes through Mount Carmel, Beit Shan, Byblos, which is on the coast of the Phoenicians, and Yarmut, Elisah, and Sumer, which are in the northern area of Phoenicia. The centers of Canaanite population came more and more to be concentrated along the main branches of the Via Maris and in the fortified towns. There's abundance of information from Egypt about Palestine in this period. We have the expulsion of the Hyksos This was done by Ahmose in the 18th Egyptian dynasty. Ahmose has a tomb inscription in which he is an officer of Ahmose, the pharaoh. So you have both the officer and the pharaoh with the same Ahmose name. According to the tradition, as I recall it, the leader of the Hyksos sent a message to the pharaoh in northern Egypt. At this time there were at least 2 different dynasties, maybe even 3 different dynasties going at the same time in Egypt. One was a Hyksos dynasty, and then in northern Egypt was the Egyptian dynasty. And the Hyksos leader sent a message to the Egyptian leader saying that he was being bothered in his sleep by the hippopotami in the capital of the northern Egyptian dynasty. Of course, this is not true because they're hundreds of miles away. But anyway, Ahmose took this seriously and attacked the Hyksos, and he was able to drive them out. In fact, Thutmose I set up a victory stela in Naharin on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River. So this means that the Egyptians followed up their campaign of driving the Hyksos out until they took over all of the territory that was originally awarded to Abraham by God. Now we come to the campaigns of Thutmose III, about 1468 to 1436. At least 16 military campaigns to Palestine and Syria. There are 119 cities mentioned in this topographical list, and these were led by the kings of Kadesh on the Orontes and Megiddo. These are the cities that were conquered by Thutmose III. There was rebellion going on all the time because of the influence of the Mitannian kingdom, which is in Mesopotamia. Sile, this is a frontier post on the Egyptian border. We've seen it before, where the Egyptians began from Sile and they went to Gaza. This is 150 miles, and they did this in 9 or 10 days, which means that they were averaging over 15 miles a day. Then they went from Gaza to Yahum, which is only 75 miles, but it took them 11 or 12 days, which means that they were meeting opposition as they went along. Thutmose had a conference at Yaham to decide the route to the Jezreel Valley. This is described by Steindorf and Seeley in their book, When Egypt Ruled the East, pages 53 through 56. There was a southern route that they could take that would go from Yahum to Ta'anach, which is one of the main fortresses on the passes through the Carmel Range. And then there was a northern route. It left the Sharon north of Zephoth and reached the Jezreel Valley north of Megiddo. Now, both of those were convenient to use. They were easy travel. But there was a third route, the narrow Aruna Pass. And this is what Thutmose III chose to take. He went against all of his generals who said it's disastrous to go this way because the first troops would be in the valley and the others would be caught in the pass miles behind. Well, they found out that they took the right route because the forces of the opposition were at Ta'anach and at Megiddo. And they went right between. They caught the enemy by surprise, and there was a great victory for the Egyptians, a complete victory. There's also the story about the taking of Joppa. It's hard to know whether this is historically reliable or not, but it mentions that 200 baskets were sent into the city of Joppa. Each basket contained a soldier. And then, of course, when they got inside, they surprised the inhabitants of Joppa, and the city was easily taken. There have been 3 copies of the principal lists that have been preserved. 2 lists contain 119 Canaanite town names. The third adds 231 more for a total of 350. There were 2 principles that were used. The roster was composed on the basis of lists from the first expedition and contains only those towns conquered and subjugated during this campaign. Or the towns are grouped geographically according to different districts, which include the following regions. We have the southern Lebanese Becca and Damascus, this is in the north, Bashan, which is in the Transjordan area, the northern Jordan Valley, the southern coastal plain and the Sharon, the northern Lebanese Becca, Galilee, northern Shephelah, the Beit Shan Valley, the Carmel slopes, and there are a couple of these. There are 119 of them. Numbers 118 and 119 are undecipherable. And numbers 55 and 56, Hashabu and Tushulti, belong to the first group. Now there are a number assigned to each of these groups, but I didn't bother to read them. But there are a total of 119 Canaanite town names. Now that basically is our description of the Holy Land in the 2nd millennium BC.